All right, Emily, thank you so much. It's 12:32. Minnesota court interpreters were to begin a work stoppage today. It's a labor protest by non-union independent contractors over the state's new pay rates. Joining us right now to explain the impact of this and explain more on why they're not on the job today is Max Nestorak, who first reported this story for the Minnesota Reformer News website. Max, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me on, Cathy.
Say, I thought that today was supposed to be the start of a new and higher pay rate for court interpreters. So, if that's the case, why are they having a work stoppage?
That's right. So as of today, interpreters got a 16% boost on in-person interpreting. That brings them to $65 an hour for certified court interpreters. But they say that's too little because they point to the fact that in 1997, their wages were $50 an hour. And if they had kept up with inflation, they'd be earning more than $96 an hour today. There's also a change that takes effect that does reduce interpreters' wages for remote hearings. This was set in 2001 when remote hearings were very uncommon, and then they became very common, as you're aware, in the pandemic. And that was the reimbursement rate of $145. So interpreters got a big pay bump during the pandemic doing remote hearings, and now that's going back down, cutting more in half, back down to $65 an hour. And so court interpreters say we haven't been valued, we're not getting paid what we're worth, and so they're declining to take more assignments.
Can you give us a sense, Max, about the workload that these interpreters face?
So these interpreters are some of the most critical parts of the justice system. If you talk to public defenders or judges who are trying to conduct hearings in a language other than English, they show up and they do simultaneous interpretation, sometimes be it on Zoom or in person. And these interpreters say they often have to block out an entire day when they take an assignment to go to court and may have to drive 3 or 4 hours away from home. And yet, if that hearing is short, they're not paid. They may only earn a couple hours of wages that day, and it's not enough to sustain them because they can't take more work for that day. So it's this issue too of having to block off a lot of time for a court hearing that may end up being short and not pay that much.
So they're important, definitely, to what the legal system does. So I'm wondering though, they're independent contractors. So what leg do they have to stand on in terms of a contract?
Well, that's a really interesting point and something that I think is really remarkable about this labor action is that they are non-union independent contractors. Independent contractors aren't allowed to unionize. And that's why the interpreters I spoke to spoke only on the condition of anonymity because they feared retaliation or being quote unquote blacklisted and not being given more work if they were to come out as kind of the ringleaders of this action. And so I talked to them, checked in with one today, and they said they've heard from scores of interpreters who are participating, who are declining to take assignments from the court system. But we'll see how it plays out. I think it's a little early to see how unified they are if the courts are having a lot of trouble filling their spots. You talked to the court administrator, state court administrator Jeff Shorba sent out an email saying that contingency plans were in place, and the court told me today those are in effect, so they're able to kind of triage the most important cases and make sure those have an interpreter from a staff interpreter who's employed by the court system. But it's too soon to tell yet, I think, what the work stoppage is having on the court system.
Too soon to tell about the effect, but I'm wondering how long might the stoppage last?
They tell me they're prepared to withhold labor indefinitely until they are given higher wages. And now, Jeff Shorba, the state court administrator, said he will go to the legislature and ask for additional funding to raise wages, get them up to $75 an hour, which is notably less than interpreters are demanding. They want upwards of $96 an hour to keep up with inflation and have the same buying power they did in 1997. But the legislature is not in session for more than another month, so that money isn't in the near future.
Right. And by the way, numbers wise, I mean, I know court interpreters are required by law, right, to interpret what happens to the cases where folks are in court, and you need an interpreter now. So I'm wondering, what are their numbers? I mean, how many are we talking about here across the system? Do you know?
It's hard to get numbers. The interpreters spoke to say they have connected with 80 or more independent contractor interpreters who may participate in this strike. There's also, as I mentioned, staff interpreters who are employees of the state and can fulfill some of those duties, but those staff interpreters are really stretched thin as well. So adding that much more work on it, I heard from one interpreter who used to work as a staff interpreter, and she said, without independent contractors, court can't function.
So this is obviously a serious problem, and I'm wondering, a final question here. Have you had a chance, beyond talking to the court administrator, have you heard from lawmakers, anybody else weighing in on this at all?
I haven't yet. That's something I definitely want to find out more as we see how this work stoppage affects court. The state lawmakers appropriated a significant amount of money to the court system this past session
Right.
to boost pay for public defenders who had also threatened to strike in a never before threatened to strike moment. And they won upwards of 70% or more raises because of that additional funding from the legislature. So I will definitely be watching that to see what comes in the coming months.
You mentioned this, and I just want a quick comment from me on this. You mentioned that some of the folks that have walked off the job are worried about being perhaps blacklisted. I mean, because they were afraid to talk publicly. So this is clearly very sensitive too.
Right. Yeah. Independent contractors are not employees and are not granted the same protections that most employees have from retaliation. And so they have the right to fear that even if they can't be explicitly fired, or directly fired. Instead, they could just be not given more work. And so they're afraid of retaliation that they don't have protection from as independent contractors.
All right. Max, I know you're going to be following this story. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Good to talk with you again. Max Nestorak is a reporter for the Minnesota Reformer News website.